How to build a Blackgates Sweet Pea 5-inch gauge locomotive. Part 58. The wheel sets in more detail. Fitting the horn keeps and testing the suspension, then repairing the marks I made in the front axle when I drilled the axle box oil reservoirs. The time has come to refit the driving wheels. This proved to be a difficult job, and some modifications to the axle boxes were required first. As shown in the previous episode, when I dismantled this engine, I wrote on the parts where they came from. And once again, R is rear right. If you look carefully, it is also written on the wheel, so there can be no misunderstandings or errors. All the marked parts will end up being fitted in the same positions as they were when I dismantled the engine. This proved to be a difficult job inasmuch as it was a very fiddly job. Engaging the nuts on the ends of the bolts proved to be problematic, and frequently a 4BA nut would drop down between the cavity at the rear of the wheel and the chassis. And the only way to remove these nuts, apart from holding the chassis over my head and shaking it, was to use a small telescopic magnet. Every workshop should have telescopic magnets. They are incredibly useful. They are really good for picking up ferrous metal parts that you drop on the floor, and these magnets are also useful for magnetizing parts so that they stick to your screwdriver or spanner or whatever you want them to stick to. This clip shows one of the horn keeps bolted in place, and I've just tested the strength of the suspension. Everything feels good. I don't know what's going on here. On every one of the horn keeps was a long bolt fitted with 2 lock nuts. One minor problem with the design of the valve gear of a Sweet Pea locomotive is that the valve timing is very dependent on the axle being more or less in the same position. But these long bolts are a bit of an extreme solution. When they're fitted in position, there is no movement whatsoever on the axle boxes. Quite a few years ago, long before I started making the videos, I built this Sweet Pea, and I never had any problem with the valve timing changing when I ran it around my garden railway. It ran quite well. I played with it for a while and sold it. This was a bit of a special though. It was a 5-inch gauge Sweet Pea converted to 7¼ inch gauge, so it does look a little bit different. It was also fitted with a 6-inch Southworth Engines boiler feed pump. The Sweet Pea that I'm currently rebuilding will look quite a lot like this one. My friend James, who's going to be the recipient of the engine, has already bought the feed pump for it. I'm just hoping that it works, as it was bought online. The clip on screen at the moment shows me fitting the horn keep to the other side. I thought it would be a good idea to clean up the horn keeps, and it's easier to do this with them in situ, and I'm using one of the new rotary brushes that I bought. They are made from a material very much like Scotch-Brite, which is abrasive, and they work really well. And the good news is a large pack of these via eBay were very cheap to buy and arrived quickly. I thought it was a good time to apply some oil to all the moving parts of the suspension, not forgetting of course to lubricate the axles. When the engine's the right way up, it will be a simple job to fill the oil reservoirs that are drilled into the axle boxes. Time to fit the front wheels, and you can clearly see the oil reservoirs in the axle boxes in this clip. Fitting these wheel sets to the chassis took quite a while and was a very fiddly job, so I'm speeding through it a little bit. In this part of the clip I'm fitting the spring units after dipping them in some grease to temporarily hold them in place to the axle boxes when I turn them upside down. It didn't, however, go quite as smoothly as this. The first time I turned them upside down, one of the springs fell off. But after applying more grease to the spring unit, everything was fine, and I managed to get them in place. The hard part is getting the pegs on the end of the spring units into the holes of the brackets that are fastened to the chassis. This horn keep has the letters RF written on it, which stands for, if you haven't guessed it already, radio frequency. No, sorry, it stands for right front. Once again, as with the rest of the horn keeps, I'm removing these ridiculously long bolts. There is no place for these on this engine. I fitted the horn keeps in place in exactly the same way as I showed with the rear set, so I'm just going to skip through this part, just so I don't get quite so many stupid comments, like, for instance, I didn't subscribe to this channel to slip into a coma. By far the worst comment I've ever had on my channel was, I didn't subscribe to this channel to watch things about prostate cancer. I want to watch steam engines. I have prostate cancer, I've had treatment for it, and I'm waiting to see whether it's been successful. When I drilled the holes in the axle boxes for the lubrication points, I drilled them a bit deep on the front wheel set, and as you can see there are some drill marks in the axle. But all is not lost. I have a very quick fix for this, and besides, after I've filled in the holes, the axle will be painted. What I'm about to do is check the flexibility of the suspension system. This is where my heavy body weight is very useful. All I have to do is lean on the wheels, and this tells me if the suspension travel is okay, and indeed it is. It's really important not to have the suspension on a miniature locomotive too rigid. The suspension needs to be flexible to counteract the undulations of the track. If the suspension is too tight or too rigid, there is a serious risk of derailment. I may have to restrict the travel of the rear suspension for the valve events. Here's a close-up of the marks left on the axle when I drilled the axle box for the oil reservoirs. Time, I think, for an effective repair. This stuff is a very popular 2-pack epoxy mix. It's called JB Weld, and it's very strong. In one tube is some white epoxy resin, and in the other tube is some black epoxy resin. And before anybody writes in, yes, I know that one of the tubes contains the hardener, and obviously when you mix them together it's grey, and here I'm applying some to the holes in the axle. When this is cured, after a day or so, I will grind off the excess and then paint the axles. That is it for this episode. Stay safe, stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.